Hello, Namaste. Welcome to Dave's Hammer Show. This is English talk show on Indigenous television and ITV Nepal. This talk show features in-person and online interviews with guests from different backgrounds. We discuss the issues impacting Indigenous peoples worldwide. We connect the experiences and foster the connections between the communities. In this episode, I have invited Michel first, the first person to hold the mandate of UN Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders. This is the world's first international mechanism dedicated to protecting the environmental defenders. And I will basically discuss with the Michel first about the role of the Special Rapporteur and also the restrictions, as this is the first the mechanisms that UN recently formed. So first of all, Michel first, welcome to Dave's Hammer Show.
Thank you, Kev.
Michel first, as I have already briefed you about you as the first Special Rapporteur on Environmental Defenders. However, for my viewers to gain more insights, could you please introduce about yourself briefly to begin especially our conversation in depth on the issues or mandate that you are holding?
So my name is Michel Forst. I'm a French citizen, and I've been appointed in 2022 as the first UN Special Rapporteur on environmental defenders under the Aarhus Convention, but I guess we'll explain later on what is this convention.
So, Michel, what is the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the environmental defenders? As I told you in background that this is the first mandate that U.S. mandate or the mechanisms that the UN recently formed. So what is your role in this mechanism, and how could indigenous peoples and environmental defenders actually can benefit from your support?
Yes, so maybe I should start briefly by explaining what is this Aarhus Convention and to which and to whom it would apply. So that's 25 years ago, states decided that they would decide to create what they call sort of environmental democracy. So they decided to work together to establish this democracy by establishing a new convention, which was adopted in Aarhus in Denmark. And it was based on three pillars. The first is access to information, meaning that when a state or a company would like to develop a new activity which have an impact on the environment of people, then they would have the duty, the obligation to inform all communities, families, people who would be affected by this project in all languages, meaning that the information is not only accessible, but should be provided by the state. So that's a duty of the state. And the second pillar, which is very much related with the first, is public participation. Again, meaning that when indigenous people, communities, families would be affected by a project in their environment, then state or the company would have a duty, an obligation to consult them, and community would have the right to say no. Of course, the no is not binding, but at least they would express themselves and say why they do not want the project or why and under which condition the project would be agreed by the communities. And the third pillar, which was very new at that time, is access to justice, meaning that when rights have been affected or violated, then people, communities, individuals would have to go to the justice system, either administrative justice or judicial justice, and seek redress and reparation. And it works pretty well. Yeah. This convention has created also what we call a compliance committee, which is there to receive complaints when states or companies would not comply with the main provision of the convention. And in addition to that, because they saw that those who are the most at risk are environmental defenders and climate activists, states have decided recently, 2 years ago, to create a new mandate under the form of a special rapporteur on environmental defenders, with a view to respond immediately. The name is Rapid Response Mechanism under the form of a special rapporteur. And the idea is that when I would receive a complaint coming from a community, indigenous groups, families, or individuals, then I would take action immediately using the same working methods as other rapporteurs. And if you permit to conclude, so far, that's a universal convention ratified by 47 states, including the EU. But when it comes to companies, then that's different. Of course, the mandate is working in all states that are party to the convention. But let's say when a company based in one of the countries party to the Arts Convention is operating abroad, like for instance, a Spanish company would operate in Latin America or elsewhere and doing harm to defenders, then defenders from those countries could also seek protection for my mandate. Another example, if a company based in UK would do harm to defenders in Asia, then defenders from those countries would go to my mandate to seek protection and reparation. And we'll explain later on the working methods.
As you talked about the Aarhus Convention, to tell about the convention to my viewers is on June 25, 1998, during the 4th Environmental for Europe Minister Conference, also known as the Environment for Europe, held in a Danish city which is called Aarhus. United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe adopted a convention called Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision Making, and Access to Justice in Environmental Matters. So far, 47 countries, mainly Europe, are parties.
Yes, that's precisely why states have decided to create this extra territorial scope of the mandate. That I explained that, of course, the mandate is very much related to the parties to the Aarhus Convention, mainly the countries in the big Europe up to Mongolia. But of course, as you know, those who are the most dangerous for communities, for indigenous people, are mostly companies. And that's why when companies are based in one of the countries which is party to the convention and would operate abroad, then defenders from those countries could also seek protection from a mandate. So it's a universal mandate, provided that we find a connection between those who are affected and the perpetrators. Could be the state or companies. And if you see that there would be a company based in one of the countries based of the Aarhus Convention, then of course defenders could seek protection from a mandate. It's very new. I've started to work with my team recently, only in October last year, and we start receiving complaints coming from other countries, from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia as well. I'm not allowed to disclose the names of the countries because so far it's covered by the famous confidentiality. You know, when I'm sending a letter, then the state or the company has 60 days to reply to my complaint, and then the response of the state and my communication will come public. So it's a new mandate, and we need to raise awareness on this new mandate. And thank you to you for making it possible for me to explain this new mandate, which is a new tool at the disposal of those who are affected by companies.
Okay. Why do you think there is a need for a special protection of environmental defenders, and what are some of the threats that environmental defenders globally currently are facing?
In my past activity, because I had another mandate with the UN as Special Rapporteur on Defenders, I used to work with large NGOs like Global Witness, Amnesty, Frontline Defenders, but also Forum Asia in Asia and others. And we all recognize that those who are the most at risk are environmental defenders. In fact, the main number of killings target, in fact, environmental defenders, and most attacks are targeted to communities or local defenders that simply try to protect their environment and the land. And I was struck when traveling to Peru, to Colombia, to Africa, to Asia as well, to see that, most communities face the same challenge. In fact, they see all of a sudden companies investing their piece of land and trying to dig holes and target, in fact, families or defenders. And if they want to protest, then they are facing threats and attacks, not only by the companies themselves, but also by security forces, because they have the link and the connection between those companies and powerful actors like, of course, governments, also sometimes mafias.
Michel, as you talked about the ARAS conventions, despite the adoption of these ARAS convention, the environmental defenders, particularly from Asia, Africa, and the Americas, have faced increasing threats, and in these conventions, many, especially the European countries, are only the parties. In this context, I am interested in understanding to what extent your mandate is relevant to environmental defenders, especially from the Asia and Africa regions.
Yes, I mean, as I said, that's a new mandate, and with new working methods. And the main difference with other rapporteurs is that this mandate is based on a legally binding instrument, the Aarhus Convention, while other rapporteurs have been created simply by a resolution from the Council in Geneva, which is not at all binding. While for me, this is binding, meaning that if states don't comply with the provision of the convention, then they will be penalized. And again, if they would not comply with my recommendation regarding threats to defenders, then they would also be penalized, including companies. So we don't have time to explain because it's brand new, and we need to discuss with the staff what form of penalization would happen. But be aware that's a very new mandate with new working method, with new tools. What I'm doing is that I'm trying to reach out to those who are affected, and my staff will investigate with the support of UN bodies and NGOs the reality of the threats, the veracity of the testimonies, and then if we understand that the threats are real, then immediately, that's why it's called a rapid response mechanism, immediately would send questions to the states asking why and how, and if they have investigated already on the threats. And I could also continue by doing country visits, and I'm not obliged to wait for receiving an invitation from the state. I could decide myself, invite myself to a country to investigate when I see that there is a pattern of attacks against defenders, and then start while in the capital to discuss with the government. So that's very new. Of course, when life is at risk, then we cannot wait 6 days. Then I would issue immediate measures like relocation measures, for instance. When defenders need to be relocated elsewhere, then we could also use the usual tool to relocate defenders outside of the country to make sure that they would be at least safe for a couple of weeks, the time for me to investigate further on the risk that they're facing.
When we talk about the defending the environment or the land, indigenous peoples are often at the forefront. Can you please explain how indigenous peoples who are defending their land or environment from threats can utilize your mandate as environmental defenders?
My concern is that indigenous people sometimes or very often do not decide to become defenders. They are defenders out of a necessity. Because they are attacked, in fact, they are under pressure. So they decide to become defenders simply because they defend a piece of land which belongs to them. And that's their cosmovision, in fact. I remember I was traveling to Mongolia and then to Latin America. Many told me that the earth is not earth, that's more than that. The water is not only water, it's more. The forest is not forest, it's more than forest. That's a sort of cosmovision that is right to defend. And I'm there also to support those who are the most at risk. And for me, clearly, indigenous people are the most at risk currently. That's why together with other rapporteurs, we're trying to do our best to inform states, but also to take measures to protect defenders. Protection is good, but it's not enough. We should also be able to prevent the risk to occur. And that's why raising awareness on the possibilities offered by this new mandate is also a way for me to prevent states and companies to attack defenders. And again, when I see that there is another need to raise awareness, I will simply tweet a name or a situation saying I'm concerned by information or allegation received from that part of the country. And simply the fact that I'm tweeting, states are aware that I'm looking into possibilities and other forms of action. That's the first alert for me. raising alert on a name or situation. That's good also to inform states that I'm going to take action more in the coming days or weeks.
Michel, you mentioned some of the tools that we can use to help Indigenous peoples better understand. Could you also please elaborate on the specific tools that can be used to engage with the companies when there is a threat against the environmental defenders?
First of all, I can't do nothing without receiving a complaint. So to put a complaint to my mandate, it's very simple. You go to the website, and we'll give you the link to the website, and you click on the link, and then there is a very simple form by which you can put your complaint, explain your situation. You don't need to provide tons of reports. Simply tell your story, in fact, and my staff will contact you just to ask questions to make sure that the risks that we're facing are real, and then we'll start the process by using all the possibilities offered by the mandate to target the state or the company. And then I'm using all tools at my disposal, including what we call quiet diplomacy. That is, it's not public and sometimes more efficient to talk directly to the top of the company to explain that if they don't take action, if they don't redress, then I'm going to go public. And sometimes to see the mere fact that you are threatening them to go public, that's a deterrent for them. Because most of the companies told me that in the past, when they see their names in a report by Global Witness or by Amnesty, then that's of course hurting them a little bit. But having their names in a UN report, that are huge implications. You would see, for instance, big funds decided to defund the project, or guarantees provided by state being withdrawn, or sometimes also regional banks deciding to stop a guarantee to a project. And of course, then the shareholders would also question the top management of the company. So simply naming the name, that's sometimes sufficient to raise awareness, and then companies would come to me asking questions. Why are you targeting us? What can we do to redress the situation? Or to yes, and that's something sometimes sufficient. It's very early for me to say that because I'm starting with this human data, but already in the past I saw that naming names of the companies going public, that's sometimes very efficient.
You have already shared a lot about your own role and jurisdiction as well. Are there any limitations to your role when prosecuting attacks carried out by the companies or the states?
Yes, of course. As I explained, the convention has been ratified only by 47 states, meaning that it applies also for companies from those states. But we know that other countries are also sometimes dangerous, like Chinese companies or some African companies or companies in other countries. So the more countries would ratify the convention, the more effective the tool will be. And of course, the limitation also the territorial scope of my mandate. As I explained, I would firstly target defenders inside the Aarhus region. But of course, when it comes to companies, I would have the possibility to explore other means. But if you take the fact that that companies based in Canada or in Australia or in the US are sometimes very dangerous for defenders and for communities, because Canada, the US, or Australia are not a party to the Arts Convention, I can do nothing with those countries. So the more information we provide, the more the more lobbying we do on those countries, the more effective the mandate will be, hopefully.
Although it is short time and perhaps it is not a good time to assess, but based on your own experiences of years or two, you have mentioned that you travel to some Asian and African countries also. Could you share to what extent the government and the companies have compelled or compiled with the recommendations that you have made as the special rapporteur on the environmental defenders?
As you say, that's a very new mandate, and as you know, big companies are big machineries. And you cannot stop a project all of a sudden. It takes time. So states should first understand, then they need to talk with their lawyers to discuss what sort of measure they would take, and it start a process. But simply by deciding to start a process, we can expect that after a couple of months and sometimes years, because it's a long process, things will change in the country. Of course, for defenders, that's not it's not rapid enough. They would expect to have immediate measures or a project being stopped. But we need to understand that when it comes to companies, it's very a long process, in fact. But I'll share with member states good stories and experiences, and we have decided that in 2025 we'll issue the first report on the effectiveness of the mandate, and then maybe to change some of the working methods if we think that new methods could be more effective. And if you want to not only to put complaint to my mandate, but also to help me raise awareness of digital mandate, you could also decide to invite me for panel discussions, conferences, by which I would share with your colleagues information on this new mandate, so that the more we spread out the mandate, information on the mandate, and the more effective it would be, hopefully.
When discussing protections mechanisms, it's important to consider national protection mechanism as well. Many countries globally have such protection mechanism also, especially for journalists and human rights defenders. What is your experiences working with national protection mechanisms? What are some of the challenges that you have encountered when dealing with national protection mechanisms? And now that you are working with international protection mechanism too, how does that differ from your own previous experiences? How does that differ from national protection mechanism and international protection mechanisms? Based on your own previous experiences?
I would say that we have the best and the worst, in fact. We have, in fact, effective protection mechanisms that work pretty well, including mechanisms that have been established by communities themselves. I remember that in Latin America, I saw very effective protection mechanism established by local communities, by indigenous communities. They have indigenous guards only armed with batons that are effective to protect their communities. In countries where there is a national mechanism, sometimes you see that mechanisms are able to provide bullet-proof jackets, panic buttons, armed vehicles, bodyguards to defenders. But the bad side of the protection is that when sicarios in Latin America have decided to kill someone, then unfortunately, nobody can prevent them to do so. And I had very poor, very sad experiences in Latin America, in a country where I saw that a woman was protected by two bodyguards. She had a bulletproof jacket, she had a panic button, and a armed vehicle, but she was killed between the time when she left a vehicle to go to her house. She only had to walk 200 meters, and two sicarios were there and shot her dead. So that's the limitation of the protection mechanism. Sometimes also you see that national institutions are also very useful to protect defenders. Sometimes they are able to establish early warning mechanism, that is to detect when an attack is about to occur against a community, and to alert the police or security forces that they could come before the attacks would start. So you see in many countries different situations, but the most effective protection mechanism that I've seen are in Latin America, in Colombia, in Honduras, in Mexico. Sometimes states have decided to work with special rapporteurs to try and strengthen the mechanism, to learn lessons from other mechanisms, to share experiences, to make sure that those mechanisms would be more effective. But the main lesson is that you cannot do nothing without first starting to discuss with communities. They are the one who know better than us what to do and what to do to protect them. So no mechanism could work without the participation of indigenous people and local communities.
You have previously mentioned how communities can reach out to you, and I would like to inquire about how communities can access your service in scenario where individual in remote areas are experiencing violations, but they lack access to the internet, and also they may have difficulties in reading and writing too. How can these individuals who cannot directly contact you and so that they can access your service?
That's sometimes very difficult. In fact, and you're right. Those who are the most at risk are those who are living in remote places where there is no access to internet, and for those communities because they are not able to target or to send me information. I can do nothing. So the best would be for them to come closer to local NGOs that could also do the work for them. Sometimes I don't need to receive a complaint from the victim themselves, but from an NGO. That is, if an NGO is close to a community which is affected, then the NGO could fill the form for the community. And then I would investigate and start to discuss with the NGO to make sure that the community would give their consent to be protected. Because again, without the consent, I can do nothing. So in all occasions, we could find a way to communicate with those who are affected and don't have an access to internet to reach out to me.
So, Michel, I have asked you so many questions. I don't want to ask you anymore, but I would like to request you that perhaps give a final message to the community that who are willing to access your own mandate.
My last message would be simply to say that you are not alone. You have allies, sometimes strong allies. My team and myself, would like to work with you to know you better. So the more you can also do to send me information on your activities, the more we'll be able to protect you. So don't be. I mean, sometimes I know that it's difficult for you to reach out to the UN, but through NGOs, through other communities, you can reach out to me, and I will make my best to protect you.
Thank you so much, Michel, first for joining us at Indigenous Television and for your time.
Thank you, Kev. But nice to meet with you. Huh?
Thank you so much, Michel, first for joining us today on Dave's Hammer Show and sharing your own insights, mainly about your role and jurisdiction as the UN Special Rapporteur on the environmental defenders. With this, we have come almost at the end of the show, but our conversation continues. If you have any queries or feedbacks, you can reach us at indigenoustelevision@gmail.com. Next week, I will come up with new guests to discuss on new issues impacting indigenous peoples. Keep watching Indigenous Television and ITV Nepal. Have a nice weekend. Namaste.